Do you want to know something interesting? Wait, you don't? Oh, okay. In that case, let's just play the outro. Alright. You know the thing that blew my mind about this video? It was how difficult it was for me to write this script. Seriously, at first it wasn't all that easy. I've done plenty of videos on League of Legends' least popular and most problematic champions. I've covered the champions that people forget even exist sometimes in this game, but for some of those videos, it's been easier to write a story about than for arguably the most popular and successful champion in the game. And what could be the reason for that? I mean, how could it be that a champion that brings up that many results on Google, a champion who has become a pseudo main character, and a champion who has no short of dedicated mains, an active community, skins, and footage, ends up being a bit more challenging? At first, I thought over and over again about what more I can say besides the fact that she always seems to get new skins. I found it very hard to find a time in which she was more OP than with Aftershock as a support. And don't worry, because we will cover those things, they're still important to her story. But the thing that shocked me is that in my research, just when I thought I knew everything there was to say about this champion, I quickly found out that there's so much I didn't know. And also that Lux has one of the most cool and interesting histories ever. Her history goes into way more than just her as a champion, but also how different League of Legends was nearly a decade ago. It reminds us of the days when League truly was a small indie game, how development cycles and champion design have drastically changed, and how this champion went from being so ugly that players were comparing her to this thing, to now, 10 years later, being the face of a game that fills literal stadiums. This is the story of League of Legends poster girl, Lux. Let me start you off with a question. Have you ever seen this picture? If your answer is yes, you're probably a League of Legends veteran who's been around for close to 10 years, but if your answer was no, like mine was, it's one of those things that seems to be nearly lost over the passage of time. That picture is significant because it was Lux's original splash art, and this was her original model. She was going to look like this. Lux's designer was Shirelia. She was somebody that used to work for Riot during the early years, and she was also the one that designed Pantheon, and the item named Shirelia's Reverie is of course named after her. The champion was leaked and announced around 10 to 14 days or so before her release, but the thing is, this looks so unfamiliar to us, doesn't it? The community thought that she was more than just a little odd because they thought she was downright ugly. Thanks to the Wayback Machine, we can locate this forum thread to discuss the new champion named Lux, which went live on October 13th, 2010, and oh my goodness, this is 101 pages of pure disgust from the players. This is easily one of the funniest things I've ever seen on the internet. If you want to skim through it yourself, go ahead, but holy moly, there are some bangers in here. This is the ugliest model yet. Lux looks like Shaco's ugly sister. Her face makes Urgot pretty. I had no idea why people were comparing her to Urgot, but after looking at the pictures, I realized that's an insult to Urgot. It would be an understatement to say that players thought that she was ugly. They thought she was the ugly barnacle. Thankfully, she wouldn't be put into the game like this, and it was because of the work of one person, a fan. This painting was made by a user named CaterTot, and it was just a piece of fan art for Lux that came out after the champion reveal. But knowing that the community wasn't happy with the direction of her art, Riot would make a very difficult choice and pull the plug. They would update the forum post to inform everybody that they would be discussing her art direction internally, and then she would have her model redesigned before it went live. The new Lux was based off of CaterTot's painting, and she would end up being hired by Riot shortly after as an artist, which is really cool, and Lux's model would be changed forever because of her fan art. She would leave Riot back in 2016 to work for another company, but during her time there, she designed some really awesome and recognizable splash arts like Jinx and Syndra. But let's go back to the original article. Let's go back to the part where they updated the post. It turns out they also had to remove her for another reason: her abilities. More or less, Lux is the same champion that she was back in 2010, aside from some minor tweaks, which is completely understandable given that was a decade ago. Her kit is basically the same. However, just a few days before Lux came out, she had some different abilities. Every champion goes through ability changes in their development. That part is totally normal. Yasuo at one point had a dash on his ultimate. Riven at one point had mana. Champion testing and design during their early stages will go through several iterations. But what is abnormal is not only changing the model and artwork days before the release, but also changing abilities at the last second. Lux's reveal on the Test Realm, which was the older version of the PBE, would reveal her abilities as follows. Her passive was Illumination, her Q was Light Binding, her W was Prismatic Wave, her E was Light Strike, and her R was Malice Cannon. Shirelia's post on the reveal thread would divulge some more information. Her W, Prismatic Wave, was being changed to something different. Her passive no longer gave true sight or vision of the target, and her ultimate would no longer blind. This is super interesting. At one point, her ultimate had a blind on it, which would make it the only AoE blind in League of Legends history. Not near sight, but an actual blind like Teemo. But her W was being reworked, so what was Prismatic Wave anyway? Prismatic Wave. Passive, Lux's cooldowns are reduced. The cooldown reduction scaled up from 3 to 15%. However, the active fires a wave to the target location and back, instantly stealthing any allied champions for 3 seconds, and Lux is also struck by the wave upon return. Wow, her W gave an AoE stealth to her teammates and herself. Oh my god, that might be one of the most powerful abilities I have ever read, and it was on a basic ability. Can you imagine stealthing a Malphite on your team who ults in to gank, and then you also stealth yourself? I mean, in theory, you could start W to begin the game, walk bot lane with your team 5v5, stealth all of you, and walk into their jungle, level 1, and invade. The possibilities for this are endless. I can completely understand why this ability never made it into the game, and we will never see an ability like that. Giving your teammates something like that on a basic ability nonetheless would be absolutely insane.
Senna's E is Curse of the Black Mist, a team camouflage that disguises her and any allies who touch it.
The reworked W before her launch would end up being the shield that we all know it is today. What's interesting is that this is the only skill shot shield in the entire game. Every other shield is a point and click ability, or at least in the case of Karma's empowered Mantra shield, they have to be in the area, but Lux's shield can potentially shield up to all 5 people on your team, but it can actually miss. That's what makes this ability so cool as well, and it's something that I often see separate the good Luxes from the great ones. Being able to consistently get multi-team shields adds so much value to this ability, and for that reason, I think it's pretty well designed. Let's go back to Shirelia for a second. She was a big fan of the game series called Touhou, or the Touhou Project. In Touhou, there's a character called Marisa Kirasame who specializes in light and heat magic. Each character has these spell cards, and one of hers is named Final Spark. Lux was based heavily on this character. I mean, just look at what the Final Spark magic cannon actually looks like in the game. On top of that, Lux's Spell Thief and Sorcerer skins are also references to Marisa, and on day 1 of her release on forums, you can find that people were guessing that she was based off of the character, which is really cool. When Shirelia was designing Lux, she wanted to name all of Lux's abilities in German. This was not allowed by the higher-ups at Riot, but they let her keep one of the German names, which is why Lux's ultimate in the Champion Spotlight sounds like this.
Lux's ultimate spell is Finalis Funkeln, also known as the Mega Death Laser.
Immediately after Light Binding, cast Finalis Funkeln.
The release of Lux will go down as one of the most chaotic and probably stressful releases ever for Riot. Having to change abilities, the in-game model, the splash art, and all these things 2 weeks before launch day is bizarre to say the least, but finally on October 19th of 2010, it was her time to shine. Day 1 of Lux going live, she was not seen as very strong, but some of that wasn't directly her fault either, more of a product of the metagame at the time. Remember, this is 2010. The versatility of being able to take her as a solo laner and a support was interesting and cool, but the game did not have any set structure like we do now. The fact that she could be played as a mid or support didn't even come into play for quite a while. In fact, during the Season 1 World Championship, in the only game that Lux was locked in, she would go top lane, so that just lets you know about the meta at the time. Truthfully though, her numbers were quite low and it did plague her performance, as once again the forums were quite livid. They just spent their hard-earned 3150 IP on a champion that was underpowered and outclassed, not to mention the fact that they were already pissed about what happened with her art. After a couple of weeks passed, when players got over the drama surrounding her release, she would end up being well received and well liked. Several posts and articles talked about how the champion was very anime, which I guess is a good thing considering she's based off of this character, and the roots of comparing her to Sailor Moon can be found as early as 4 days before her release. Keep that in mind, it'll come up later. I even found a fanfic about Lux only 6 days after her release. The one caveat to that is players would note how similar her kit was to Morgana, which is true but also intentional. Lux was designed with her kit in mind to be the light to Morgana's darkness. It was apparent how underpowered she was though, so she would receive her first buff only 1 patch later, increasing the AP ratio on her ultimate. What followed is kinda crazy because from November 2nd, 2010 all the way till July 7th, 2012, that was just one of 9 consecutive buffs. Probably the best buff from this list is when they made her ultimate pop and reignite her passive, which still exists today and is basically a straight damage buff since most of the time when you press R you will already have a passive on them either by hitting a Q or an E, but even then still 9 consecutive buffs in less than 2 years is something I've never seen. So finally, after all of that love come Season 2, she would be a strong champion. In December of 2012, to celebrate the 1000th post to Liquid Legends, a popular forum site at the time that you'll now recognize as the esports brand Team Liquid, Katara would post a very well-made Lux guide. This post racked up thousands of clicks and would help Lux's popularity even more heading into 2013. But there was one player during Season 2 that already began to help make Lux a popular champion, and that guy was Rapidstar. Rapidstar was the mid laner for Azubu Frost. For those unfamiliar with him as a player, you may know him now as the coach for Cloud9 Academy. As for his team, aside from a cheating scandal where their ADC looked up at the venue screen, they were still talented. They made the finals at Season 2 Worlds, and until 2019, this is when Lux was by far the most commonly used in competitive play, and her popularity was largely thanks to Rapidstar. In Game 1 of their series versus TSM, the hugely popular North American team, Rapidstar would pick Lux versus Reginald mid lane. With so many eyes on this game, it's no wonder that she would gain more recognition, and during this tournament she was played both as a mid laner and a support. Her momentum from the World Championship in combination with a well-written guide on Liquid Legends meant that it would be inevitable to see her more in Season 3. For the first several months, she was a popular support as well as a mid laner. The new support items for Season 3 did very well with Lux, more specifically the original version of Shard of True Ice, which built out of Mana Manipulator. Lux would receive her very first nerf on patch 3.5, lowering her movement speed and increasing the cooldown on her ultimate, which at this point was known as Final Spark. After that followed another period of buffs, as she's kind of had this slight problem with role definition. When she's not clearly a support or clearly a mid laner, it does leave some gray area that makes it hard for her to find a spot, because Riot has to be super careful about not letting her be OP in 2 roles at once. It is great to have a champion that has options and diversity, but sometimes in League of Legends it's easier to design a champion specifically with one role in mind, that way you can eliminate the variable of being able to flex pick them. If we fast forward to 2014, she would see some love, and then again 2 more times in 2015 she would be buffed. The buffs specifically on 5.12 were good enough to put her back in contention as her popularity began to rise, but it was the buff on 5.17 that ended up being the kicker. This change was huge, and overnight players started to pick her up quite a bit. Her popularity began to rise as she was being picked in a lot of solo queue games, but that was also because of another reason. The theme and identity of the champion did not always have to do with her gameplay. While she's somewhere in between a mid lane carry and a support, something she always lacked in the eyes of the community back then was a good theme. The two skins on release were both pretty nice. Sorceress was weeb enough and cute enough to keep players happy, and Spell Thief was alright too. But after her release, the Lux players were not satisfied with the direction of the skins. Commando, Imperial, and Steel Legion, 3 straight military-themed skins, none of which were particularly cute. If you ask me, Steel Legion and Imperial aren't even that bad. They're decently cool and kind of fun to use, but I guess I can understand after 3 of these in a row, Lux should have received something different. Riot Iron Stylus even admitted after the release of Steel Legion to making a mistake here, but at the same time he didn't quite understand just how badly players wanted something different. So we would have to wait 2 years for the release of another Lux skin, but when it came out and when it was time for a new one, it was all worth the wait. The release of Star Guardian Lux ended up being way more than just giving one champion one new skin. After coming out with this, we saw a whole new direction from the developers and from the skin team. Whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it anime, weeby, or just plain cute, the point is we've only seen these types of skins for her in the last 5 years. Maybe it's because we already are overloaded with military themed skins, but I really doubt that we'll see anything like the original 3. Star Guardian also ended up having a huge impact on League of Legends as a whole, outside of just Lux. It's one of the best-selling and most loved skin lines, and we also got the Star Guardian game mode called Invasion. This, along with the Odyssey game and a few others, were these fun and interesting minigames within League of Legends for a skin event. I think the reason everybody liked these so much and are sad to see that we don't get them anymore is because it's a unique experience within League of Legends that uses the same mechanics, but it's a totally new game. It really makes you wonder what if Riot put some more time into like a single player or some kind of co-op campaign. Ahri still did exactly what Ahri does, but it's not on Summoner's Rift and it's a co-op game mode. With the release of a new skin and Lux being more popular because of some buffs, headed into 2016 we expected her to be strong, but just how good was Lux in 2016? How about the highest win rate she ever held? In 2016, Lux developed a new best friend, Thunderlord's Decree. The League of Thunderlords was not unique to Lux. I mean, every single person in the game was using it, but for champions like Lux and other burst mages, it was by far the best keystone they've ever had access to. Thunderlords and the now Electrocute don't work the same. Electrocute requires you to use 3 actual spells or attacks, whereas Thunderlords calculated passive enhancers as an auto attack and a spell. Basically, Nasus could have procced Thunderlords with an auto and then a Q, because the Q counted as a spell and a second auto attack. What this meant for Lux is that she could E auto attack or Q auto attack to proc her Thunderlords, as the passive popping would actually count towards a spell. Her harass was constant and reliable, and she was picked 41 times during Season 6 professional play, which was a big jump from the previous 2 seasons. In North America, Pobelter was the biggest advocate for Lux mid. Not only did he play her on stream quite a bit, but he also had the most Lux picks in Pro. Froggen was also playing quite a bit of Lux back then as well, and he's always been known to be a very good Lux player. Over in Korea, Longzhu's mid laner Frozen has tons of VODs playing her in solo queue. He was commonly practicing her in Season 6 against matchups like Syndra or Ryze, which were other control mages that didn't have such a dominant trading combo like she did. Because of her supportive nature, it also allowed her to be useful even when behind. Frozen would pick her in one game during the LCK, and funny enough, it was the best game of Lux I could find from that season. It was a game against a Lissandra mid lane matchup and EM Fire, where he finished with an impressive score of 7-0-10. After 9 to 10 successful months, Riot would nerf her on 6.6, and this would be one of their more controversial changes. The way that her shield works was changed around, as it would end up stacking going through the same ally, but the base shielding was nerfed substantially. It was also made to be more of a boomerang effect, where it would not be a linear progression on the way out and back. After these nerfs, and with Thunderlords getting hit directly, she wasn't nearly as strong as she was at her peak, so patch 6.18 was there to help her rebound, increasing the slow on her E. After being a strong champion for nearly the entire season, she finished 2016 as a decent champion. She saw some competitive play towards the end of that year, as she could be a niche counterpick mid lane to champions like Victor or Azir. Both champions have always been an okay matchup for Lux. While all these things were happening on the Rift, and when the gameplay team was focused around balancing her, the skin team was preparing something huge. In the background of all of that, they were working on a project so big, it would change not only Lux, but League of Legends forever. Over the last decade, League of Legends has always been a free-to-play game, and it's one of the least pay-to-win games possible. We can comment on who they give skins for, how they make their money, how they balance their game, and how they do all these things wrong, but at the end of the day, this game has never been and probably never will be pay-to-win. If you need proof, just look at Faker. When the best player of all time does not use skins, you technically shouldn't have to either. Now, that's not to say that there are no skins that help your champion, because the original Aetherwing Kayle might be the most OP and broken pay-to-win skin I've ever used. Before her rework, that skin always helped me last hit, and accidentally canceling auto attacks with the default Kayle was a nightmare. Some skins are also just really cool and visually upgrade your champion so much that it might even give you a slight confidence boost. Certain skins are basic, others are more complicated, but generally speaking, though I will say Riot seems to never release cheap skins anymore, you get what you pay for in this game. Even skins that are 1350 Riot points, roughly $10 US, versus skins that are 1820 Riot points, which is roughly $15, can still be different from each other in terms of quality. That extra $5 might mean that the champion has new voice lines, heavily redesigned ability animations, a new and unique recall pattern, and in some cases, might even feel like a whole new champion. So, when Riot started releasing their very first ultimate skins with Pulsefire Ezreal, Spirit Guard Udyr, and DJ Sona, all which cost nearly $30 US, you would better hope you get your money's worth. Some players thought these skins were worth the money, and others thought they didn't live up to the price tag, but when League of Legends' brand new ultimate skin was leaked on November 7th, 2016, it blew people away. An article on Player One called it the most ambitious skin to date. Fansided complimented Riot by saying they really got it right with this skin, and Esports as well as Gamer Decide ranked this skin as either their #1 or #2 best skin in the game and completely worth your money. Elementalist Lux is an ultimate skin. It's almost $30 just like the others, but what separates this skin and why players have such high praise for it is exactly why the skin is such a big part of her story today, because the skin is so important to this champion. All the stops were pulled out by Riot here. The effort to sell this skin was unmatched by any other skin they've ever released, from multiple forms of teasers and plenty of different languages to crafting an entire animated short specifically about Lux and her new elements. When this skin was released, it wasn't just about a new skin, it was about a new character essentially. Lux was reimagined through this skin. Over on the Skin Spotlight YouTube channel, which are videos completely dedicated to brand new League of Legends content, their most viewed video after all these years is the Elementalist Lux video. Say what you want about the price tag, but to me, this is the best skin in the game hands down, and is pretty bang for your buck. With all of the different forms, the incentive to hit your spells to gain the form, as well as the animated splash art, profile screen, summoner icons that came with purchasing the skin for no additional cost, massively upgraded auto attack animation over the default Lux, as well as things like sound effects, new voiceover lines, and probably the coolest ultimate animation in the game, how is this not the best skin? I could easily see people commenting on this video saying since the day that they got the skin, it's the only one that they can use. Even though she has plenty of other great skins, something about this one is just so good. According to Riot, it's in the top 3, or at least in the top 3 of all of their highest sold skins in the game. And at that price tag, wow. I mean, has this skin generated over $1 billion in revenue with this many skins sold and at $30? Maybe. Even though she wasn't top tier, the skin kept her around and kept her relevant. Finally, once we got to 7.7, she got her most famous buff ever, in which she was given the reset mechanic on her ultimate. After this hit the live servers, I remember playing so much of Lux. The entire reason I even have Mastery 6, despite never really playing the champion before 2017, was because I just thought it was so fun to get our resets, and it felt so rewarding to play this champion. It was interesting and fun to have to get the reset. Sadly, this mechanic no longer exists today because of how overpowered she was later on, but I really hope in the future it would be awesome for them to consider bringing it back. On 7.15, just a few months later, she would be buffed again, another pretty solid attempt to help her out and bring her back into the meta. Even with a nice couple of changes, it wasn't enough, so over the next year, she would receive her 2 biggest buffs ever, which took her from being an okay champion to terrifyingly overpowered. Firstly, on 8.7, the already cool reset mechanic was made into a monster of a mechanic, getting resets after a 1.75 second delay, and a much bigger refund earlier on in the game allowed her to spam ultimates like its Earth mode. Only a month later on patch 8.9, we reached the point in which Lux got the best buff she's ever had. This patch is just full of Lux changes. To start, her stats were increased. Buffing attack speed on mages is already an underrated change, but in the case of Lux, being that her passive requires her to auto-attack, this was a buff to her damage and her wave clear. I'll come back to her Q in a second, but let's jump down to her E buffs. The missile speed and the radius on E were hit in compensation for what got stronger, with a lower cooldown and lower mana cost. The ability to spam this all the time with the wave clear and poke was definitely a worthy trade-off. Both lines of the changes to her W are fantastic. Doubling the shield every single time increased her overall tankiness and survivability, something that coupled well with a certain tank keystone rune. Lastly, the buffs to her Q can almost entirely explain why she became the best support in the game later on. If Lux support is going to build items like Ardent and Athenes, your main goal isn't to deal damage but to be more of an enchanter. It would be great to max your shield first, as most enchanters do that, but the problem with Lux is that your cooldown was really long on your E, which is your main damaging ability, and you wanted to put points into your Q because it was the only CC you had, which is just as important as having a big shield. Making Lux's Q cooldown a static 10 seconds meant that support Lux could always max this last with basically no consequences. This meant more points into your shield either right away or up until level 13, depending on if you max W or E first. The ban rate history of Lux is one of my favorite graphs on League of Graphs. Even when she was strong back in Season 6, she didn't see that many bans, and that's a testament to how the champion is designed. Her skill shots are pretty slow, and she's kind of hard to hate playing against. The chances of somebody complaining about how much they hate Yasuo are super high, but I don't think I've ever heard of somebody who just can't stand Lux. For the most part, she's never been a high priority ban, except for this one time. When talking about Lux being one of the most broken, overpowered, and top tier champions in the game, she's only ever been that way once in her entire history, which was last year. In 2019, I did make a dedicated video about Aftershock Lux support, and in that video, I claimed she was the best champion in the game at the time. The combination of tankiness, damage, constant AoE shielding and healing, crowd control, and a good laning phase made her a top priority pick, both in solo queue and competitive play, for a number of weeks and months. The fact that she was unkillable means that she could stay alive in all those fights and keep spamming her shields on teammates. The other thing to blame here are the changes to Aftershock. It was given much higher base stats and it wasn't required to build as many tank items for it to be effective, so non-tank champions like Lissandra could make great use of this rune. By the end of 2019, Lux finished with 156 bans, 197 picks, around a 17% presence, and a positive win rate overall in professional play. All of these numbers are by far the highest she's ever had in pro. Lux support was directly phased out because of the nerfs on 9.14. As stated before, the ability to max Q let support Lux get a bunch of points into her shield, so that part would be reverted. The doubling shield strength was also removed, and her reset mechanic on her ultimate would also be removed. All of these nerfs were definitely a big hit for Lux, but I can at least understand why they made these exact changes. They tried to buff AP Lux and mid lane by increasing her AP ratios. Though she hasn't been nearly as strong as she was since those nerfs last year, especially in support, recently Lux has started to make strides into becoming a stronger meta champion. One of my favorite new changes is that she can flash during her ultimate. The biggest use case for this is that if you need to flash backwards to gain distance, or if you want to dodge a skill shot during her ultimate. Normally for this type of ability, the animation would lock you in place, but being able to flash out of the way of something and still get the R off is really cool. As recently as a couple of days ago, she was just given a brand new buff to her E, and the slow was given some more power. This increased both the play rate and the win rate for her in mid lane, and after playing a lot of Lux myself for this video, I can vouch for it. It actually feels pretty good. In addition to all of the hype for her new changes, outside of the main game, Wild Rift, which is the new League of Legends mobile game, has all of the Lux mains all giddied up by how her champion model looks. Most of the Discord server the last couple of days has just been them drooling over pixels, which is really weird, but I guess whatever makes you happy, dude. Lux has always been a champion that serves to help people learn the game. It's not just that she's easy to pick up, but in the realm of the game, she's also quoted on the pings. Her voice lines talk directly to the summoner to tell you you're doing a good job, and with her bubbly and light personality, she's really easy to enjoy as a starter champion. I think that part of the reason she's able to fill such an important role in the League of Legends universe could be because of the comfortability of her theme. When people see Lux, she's exactly as you expect of her, which could allow newer players to get familiar with the character. There's nothing too crazy or unique about a blonde mage in a fantasy setting. Those coming from the Warcraft universe could easily see Lux and think to themselves, hey, that's just like Jaina Proudmoore. The thing that makes Lux so different from the rest of the blonde mages is how different her story is than you might expect. You could know absolutely nothing about League of Legends, but still watch and enjoy the new Warriors cinematic and see Lux and say, yeah, that's gotta be the game's pretty girl protagonist that we all root for in the main story. But the day that she was announced more than 10 years ago, that couldn't be further from what we have now. Whether you like Lux for the skins, the gameplay, the lore, or the comfortability of knowing exactly what you get from her, Lux's unique history dating back to 2010 is one of the best ones and most interesting ones I've ever had the chance to cover. She's a fun, interesting, and exciting champion who has the best skin in the game, and there's just something so rewarding about landing a Q and then following up with an ER combo. Lux is one of the best designed champions in the game, and she's definitely one of the coolest too. But please, Riot, I'm asking just to fix one thing. Just one thing. Stop putting out Lux skins. Come on, man. Seriously. Where are the Riven skins?